Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Hello and welcome to today's Battle Mech presentation. Today we're going to be looking at the Sentinel, which has been getting a bit of slander on SLComNet recently, or at least if you're listening to this video in the time frame it was released. The Sentinel is one of those medium mechs that is not omnipresent, but that you've probably seen a couple running around every once in a while. It has been in production on and off, mostly on, since the middle of the Star League era. It's definitely not the greatest mech out there, but it has some advantages. It's fairly common, does fit part of the role that it was given fairly efficiently. So let's get into it. After the War of Star League aggression ended, people kept their military up to date and kept innovating in the battle mech realm mostly for most of the 27th century, but this was mainly a peacetime weapon development era. What we mean by peacetime weapon development era is pretty straightforward. That means that people have pretty much unlimited budgets. People can innovate for innovation's sake, so that doesn't mean that the mechs that are going to come out or the weapons that are going to come out are going to be any real good. And you're going to start building massive amounts of weapons just so the industries can keep rolling and people can keep working. In the history of the Inner Sphere, that's a very, very odd situation to happen. It didn't really happen very often once the Star League fell. Maybe in the era between the end of the War of 39 and the Clan Invasion, you could say you're in that kind of position. But outside of that, it was mostly a Star League kind of situation to happen. Here we have two mechs that came in that particular era on the side here, including the Shootist, which was the original command mech for the SLDF, which was quickly replaced. I do like the Shootist, but it's an odd machine in more ways than one. In that era, Defiance Industries was a Terran Hegemony-owned but Lyran residing and Lyran operated in terms of the citizens military hardware company, and they made quite a few different battle mechs and parts. But in the late 2650, they were given a contract by Steiner directly to build an infantry support machine for their military. Infantry support at that point was mainly covered by the albeit, which is one of those not very fast, very heavily armored, and weirdly equipped medium mech. Depending on which version of the albeit you buy, you either have something that has decent long-range punch, but nothing that really short range, or decent medium-range punch, but very limited ammo. So what Defiance started building was something that was going to be completely different from the albeit, but still in the same general category of medium mech. Unlike the albeit, the Sentinel falls in the category of small mediums at 40 ton, which a lot of techs actually think is a cursed range because a lot of mechs in that weight category are just strangely lackluster. You have to think, though, that it's probably because 35-ton light mechs are generally at the top of their bracket and are fairly well equipped, while the Sentinel falls into that bottom of the medium bracket and end up being either too fast and too poorly armored and too heavily armed or anything in between. The Sentinel is powered by a Pitband 240, giving it a speed of 97 kilometers per hour on good days, and it's cooled by 10 single heat sinks because it really doesn't need any more than that most of the time unless you're on some of the different models. The Pitband 240 is a fairly common engine, so it's not a hard part to get, and it's in a standard configuration on the Sentinel, so it's easy to put in and replace. On most model, you're protected between 5.5 and 6 tons of standard compound from Valiant Lamellor, which is a very common armor type, and it gives you average protection. It's not a whole lot, and if things get dicey, you're probably going to suffer. But if you're supporting albites, which are heavily armored, it's going to help. The best thing on all the Sentinel is the Starling Benicia model AS829G comm system. It's actually a very fancy one and one that you don't really see in many other battle mechs. And it's powerful enough to cut through even fancy ECM, like the Guardian or the standard electronic warfare equipment, which was common, well, rare, but common enough during the Succession War. The first version of Sentinel that came out is the STN-1S, which remained in production for a couple of months. It really wasn't one of those mass-produced units for a reason we're going to see in a moment. It was using off-the-shelf part to make a long-range support unit for infantry using an AC-2, which is never a good idea. And for closer range support, you had a Coventry Quad 4-tube SRM and a Defiance A1 small laser. All of that was packaged around 6 tons of armor, which was deemed enough at the time, but honestly isn't enough if all you're shooting is a stiff breeze and 4 little missiles. Yes, you can probably damage and be really mean to vehicles with a mech like this, but for anything more armored or more solid, probably not going to reach the height that you want it to reach. In 2652, the Star League actually voted themselves the ability to build and buy whatever they wanted from whatever factory in the greater Star League area for whatever reason that they wanted, and part of the reason for that was actually the Sentinel. The Lyrans got kind of mad. They tried to block the sale of the Sentinel to the SLDF and other member states. Things got a bit heated, but nothing really came of it, outside of a few off-the-book skirmishes between the Lyrans, the SLDF, the Free Worlds League, and a few other people, just getting into it, but no official war declared, no official police action declared, and the Star League getting their way. This did lead, however, to the creation of the Sentinel that most people remember, and the one that would be mass-produced for the longest time, really. What came out was the STN-3L, L for League, and it was a model that was in production about until the time the Succession War made all the parts on it harder to procure or just simply impossible to build. It had 5.5 tons of armor, which is less than the original model, but not by much, and it featured really advanced weapons for the time. A Kawabata Ultra AC-5, the first mech to really use that kind of weapon. It was a prototype type of weapon, so it kind of jammed more than usual. Pilots could actually stomp the right feet of their mech down to try to clear the jam, and it worked a decent amount of times. And it also added Defiance Streak to SRM, with Streak technology allowing you to only shoot when the missiles actually have a full lock, which makes it very ammo efficient and half decent. In a lot of situations, those Streak SRMs are pretty useful, especially when you're dealing with vehicles and other light targets. It also used a brand new Defiance B1A small laser, which sometimes interfered with that SRM loading system. You do have to have a technician look it over and make sure it doesn't break, basically. It was fairly fast at about 10 times the firepower of the 1S with that Ultra AC-5. It was more accurate, and basically anyone who wanted one could get one. The majority of the people who bought them was the SLDF to support their uplights. House Steiner, House Merrick, and House Davion buying the rest of them. House Steiner, of course, buying the majority because that's what they wanted to buy in the first place. The SLDF Royal Divisions, of course, wanted to have their own version of the Sentinel because that's what they did back in those days, and a bunch of money was dumped in the STN-3LB project. It uses an XL engine and endo steel to save as much weight as possible. It makes the price go way up, obviously, and you get 7 tons of the good ferrofibrous armor, at least good for the time. For weapons, what you actually get is a Gauss rifle instead of the Ultra AC-5, giving you a massive long-range punch, and you take out those SRM tubes and you replace it with a medium laser. You still keep the small laser well. So you get more energy weapons, which can be useful in that mid-range category. And with a Gauss rifle, well, you get a sniper weapon that you can easily move around since the mech is fairly quick. A significant number of them served during the original Star League Civil War and during the Civil War in the Pentagon Worlds at the formation of the clans, because that's what the SLDF regiments had when they were all the way out there in what would become the clan homeworlds. The Sentinel production line was kept open, at least in some fashion, until 3014, because the design was no longer, being purchased in large enough amounts for Defiance to keep the line open. The design was changed as the modern technology dropped off the face of the inner sphere, but, people still used the Sentinel in a few different variants at the time. The 3K is your typical Succession War model, which uses a standard Defiance Type J 5-class autocannon rather than the Ultra autocannon, and a very standard Ollie 2-tubed SRM rather than the Streak SRM. You've got lighter weapons by a small amount, which allows you to carry an extra ton of AC5 reloads and an extra half ton of armor, so you can stay in the battle longer than the original, more popular model. And with more tons of AC5 ammo, you can actually have various forms of specialty ammo. During the Succession War, you didn't have a whole lot of different specialty ammo available. You could have standard high explosive armor piercing rounds, you could have flechette against infantry, or you could have flak against aircrafts. So you could mix and match a little bit with that gun. There's also 2 other variants that came in that particular time frame or based off that model. The 3KA uses a large laser instead of the AC5, which a lot of people really appreciate. You lose on range, but you do have far more staying power with that. And you get 3 extra heat sinks so you don't burn yourself up with that laser. You do get a little bit more armor as well in the balance. 3KB is a little bit more straightforward. You replace the AC5 with a PPC and 3 extra heat sinks, so you get the same range, 4 punch with that PPC. It's an overall half-decent model at that point. Both of those, the KA and the KB, make the Sentinel a very nice patrol mech or a nice raider. It really is that base 3K model, I would say, that wasn't popular enough to keep the production going. The Comguard and Comstar had quite a few Sentinel in their inventory, so when the War of 39 started, well, just before it started, Auscurita were given a whole bunch of them, just so that they could fight the Davion on a more equal ground, let's say. Surprisingly, that STN-3M model still had the Ultra AC5, quite possibly because the technology was being recovered and being more or less widespread in that era as NICE and Ausmeric had started decrypting the information on how to rebuild them. The SRM tube was kept as standard, but it was a Canopian model rather than a Curitan model, so some of the Curitan industrialists didn't quite like it. That's a very minor gripe here. With the tonnage difference, you do replace the small laser with a medium laser, so you get a better, short-range punch with a decent medium-range weapon. As time went on and C3 technology became available, some of those were actually modified to take out that medium laser and put a C3 slave instead inside the machine. I probably would have taken out the SRM instead of the C3 slave and maybe add up some ammo or modify things around, but once again, I'm not the Curitan engineer that worked on that project. House Davion did have quite a few different Sentinels in their inventory and had kept buying it during the FedCom era. So when 3063 came around, they actually decided to release a new model, which was the STN-4D, using some of their brand new modern technology. The Ultra AC5 is replaced with a faster firing rotary AC5, taking out the Streak SRM2 because at that point you just go brrrr rather than shooting missiles. The laser from the 3M or any of the other models is taken out and replaced with an ER medium laser, which does give you that very nice medium range punch, even though it's the not as efficient inner sphere model. I am pretty sure that quite a few actually got a clan model put back in just because of how salvage was during Operation Bulldog and what was starting to become available through fighting the clans that were now spread out throughout the entire inner sphere. You also have 7-ton ferrofibrous armor on the design, which actually makes it fairly tough for a mech its size, but the fact that it has barely enough ammo to fire for a full minute with a rotary AC5 does mean that you're going to have to move back and reload every so often. The Word of Blake, of course, had control of Esperus and Defiance Industries during a part of the Jihad, so they did have to release their own version of the Sentinel with the STN-5WB. Uses a light engine, so you save a little bit of weight there, and uses it to add armor to the base design. And what you do on the gun side, you actually use 2 independent light AC-5 with only 1 ton of ammo and 3 ER medium lasers. Honestly, if you ask me as an engineer, I would have put maybe 2 ER medium lasers and 2 tons of ammo, especially since at that point you start having a lot more specialty ammo available for things like light autocannons, including armor piercing and some of the fancy explosive rounds. I'm not one to try to understand what the Word of Blake is doing, but it's also not a model that you're going to see all that often. For Flanigan, we do see a lot of Sentinel go by, well, often enough, actually, and we do offer 2 more or less standard refits for people who show up with them. The first one is when we want to make the Sentinel more of a close support kind of unit. A lot of people kind of enjoy having that, and what we do is we use a snub-nose PPC instead of the standard PPC which you add in the 3KB series. You add more heat sinks to keep it cool, you put the rest into armor. It really depends here on what the client wants to pay for. It's not a standard refit, but it's something that we have fun with. The second one, of course, is your standard, well, I want a plasma rifle on it. So this one requires a lot more work. We do have to replace the heat sink kit with double heat sinks. After that, we put 2 tons of shooting foam, and the SSRM is replaced with an SSRM-4, usually loaded with Inferno rounds because people who want plasma rifle want to cook people's lives. We also make sure that the laser is a medium laser. It's not that difficult to do at that point. Sometimes we can put an ER medium laser in depending on what we have in stock. Once again, those are not standard refits, just stuff that people bring us and ask us to do. Defiance's newest version of the Sentinel actually combines some clan-grade technology with Inner Sphere 1, but not in the best way possible, at least not in my opinion. The first thing they do is they actually put a Clan XL engine here because they have the technology to do it now. They probably would have gone with a light engine if they weren't able to build those more clan-grade equipment. And the laser is replaced with an ER medium laser that is actually clan-grade. Well, to save on weight a little bit as well, they put an XL gyro in, which is not a terrible idea. It does raises the price significantly, but still it's an okay upgrade. Your main gun remains an Ultra AC-5, but it's still an Inner Sphere grade 1, which is what I find a little bit sad in that design because the Clan Ultra AC-5 is actually rather superior to its Inner Sphere counterpart because it doesn't have a minimum range and has a little bit more normal range as well. Your missile launchers are actually replaced with 2 larger Thunderbolt 5 missiles. Rather than SRMs which shoot volleys, Thunderbolts are larger missiles with a heavier payload, which is okay unless someone has a very advanced AMS, which would cause some issues. The ammo for the mech is protected by Case 2 and 6.5 tons of standard compound, so you're well protected in the new Sentinel, even with the more risky XL engine in. In terms of pure infantry support, the Sentinel kind of falls short, just like the Hoplite normally did, but for different reasons. You can't really do close support with it because of its main gun. It doesn't have very much armor, but it is fast. It can flank things that the infantry is keeping mired in, and it's just as enough punch to take out light vehicles, especially those technicals that people sometimes put out, especially in the situation where people are revolting, as an example. Paired with the Hoplite, especially the 4B Hoplite, it's a decent enough mech in that particular role, and it was going to give infantry companies something that's reliable to have their back. With only really a stoppage of about 60 years in production, the Sentinel is not something that's going to be super common compared to some of the other mechs, but it's a thing that you are going to see fairly significantly. A lot of them were built during the Succession War with basic technology, and they were actually easy to salvage and easy to repair at the time. So it's not a thing that it will ever really disappear unless something really strange happens and someone decides to take all the Sentinels and use them to build other mechs out of them. So I thank you very much for listening to me for so long. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.